welcome back. We're back in the studio at the university. We've spent the last several days with this piano action in my shop, getting a lot of regulation taken care of, getting the new parts put on, and now this morning we're back here again to put the action back in the piano, and we're going to also be cleaning the soundboard and working on the pedals a little bit. But this is the exciting part. So before we go on, let's just slide this action in for a minute and see what it sounds and feels like. I have it on this special little action table that can roll right up to the cabinet. We can slide the action right in. Because sometimes in some portions of regulation I might have this action in and out 15 or 20 times. So it's nice to have something to put it on. The cheek blocks make sure that it's positioned properly in the case. Ooh, that feels good. Right at the very beginning, we can hear there's some discrepancies in tone. These notes here are a little bit too quiet, right? These three notes. It's a little bit uneven up here too. Oh, it sounds good down here though. Wow. Well, that sounds and feels great. Now when I put it back in here, I check a few things like the let off, the drop, the back checking, the hammer return springs on the repetition levers. Those all feel real good. We have a nice fit here. So it still needs to be tuned and it needs some voicing. And a few other things that we need to do with this is we need to make sure that the hammers all strike all three strings at just the right spot. Because the way the piano action works in a grand piano is you have the soft or shift pedal, which moves the piano action over to the treble side. Like you can watch this move over. That's shifting. That's the shift pedal. So it moves over so that only two of the three strings will be struck by the hammer. So this one, I don't know if you guys can see that from the top or not, but this I'm pushing this up and all three strings are striking perfectly like that. There are a couple in here that we're going to have to move the hammers over on. There's a bad unison for you. So that's one thing I'm going to do. And the first step in that, for my process, is I'll go through. Now see, that sounds pretty good like that, but I'm blocking out the two strings on the right side, and this is not, so I can hear that this is not striking the left-hand string properly. So I'm going to put a little mark with my chalk. On that note, and I'm just going to go through the whole sequence. Okay, and now we'll slide the action out into my lap. Now, every hammer, or every key that has a white chalk mark on it heading in that direction is a hammer that needs to be moved over a little bit. A couple of things that you guys didn't see on the video are me burning the shanks in. Sometimes these hammers are glued on slightly crooked, so I have to heat the shank up and twist the hammer one way or the other to make it go straight towards the strings. And another thing that you didn't see was traveling the hammers, where I take a board and put them under the hammers and lift them up and down. And if they're going sideways, then I put a piece of paper underneath the hammer to make it go straight up towards the strings. So that's already been done. And these look really darn good for the most part. And that actually evened up the tone here quite a lot. When I mentioned earlier that this sounded a little weak right through these three notes, those are three notes that were only striking 2 strings rather than 3 strings. So moving them over so that the hammer strikes all 3 strings made a big difference. It's a lot more even. That sounds pretty good. And now with the shift pedal engaged, I'm making sure that the left hand string is not being struck by the hammer. So I've shifted the whole action over, so now it's only striking 2 strings. So when I block off the 2 strings on the treble side and play it, then we can't hear that string on the right hand side because it's not being struck. It needs to go over the other way a tiny little bit more. So I'm going to put a chalk mark on this hammer going in the other direction. Wow. Juice those up a little in the top high end. Boy, that feels good. And now I'm going to go and do the same thing in the bass section. That sounds pretty good. Well, let's slide the action out now, and we'll go ahead and clean the soundboard. And then I'll put the action back in and tune the piano, and we'll engage in some voicing at that point. Accelerated action, perma-free action, hexagrip pen block, and diaphragmatic soundboard. All Steinway patents. Here's where things get a little bit noisy sometimes. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is tune the piano. And as I'm tuning this piano, I will have a chance to think about each note, the way it feels and the way it sounds as I move across the entire scale. And in the modern world, with modern software, I'm going to use something that you could get on the App Store if you wanted to, but it's quite expensive. In the old days, we would start with a tuning fork, build a temperament, and work our way out. But modern tuning with modern software lends itself to much greater stability. And so I'm going to go ahead and fire up my software here. And this is called Rayburn Cyber Tuner. And what I will do first is take readings off of this piano, and it reads, I think it's 5 different partials, and based on those partials, discrepancies from theoretically predicted values, if physics really worked on pianos in a straight fashion, it will determine an appropriate tuning for this particular piano in this particular space with this particular level of humidity. And it does quite an accurate and great job. So we'll start with taking some readings. Now as I'm tuning this, this C has a slightly different feel to it on an excessively firm blow. Most people aren't going to play the piano that loud. But I can feel that, and I can feel that the jack underneath the knuckle, this particular knuckle might be in a slightly different place, because I can feel that that feels different on an extremely firm blow. You wouldn't notice that in playing, but I'm noticing it. So this C, when we pull the action out, I'm going to have a look at that jack, where it's placed under that knuckle as well. This is the analysis that one does when you tune the piano for the first time after putting a lot of new parts on it. We're doing extensive regulation. Well, so here we are back again. We're coming towards the end of this long project of doing partial action rebuilding on the Steinway B. I've finished doing some tuning on the piano, and as I've tuned the piano, I've been able to listen closely to each and every note, and I've identified 4 or 5 notes that I think need a little bit of more work on them. But first, let's listen to the piano for a minute. Wow, I just got to tell you, this piano is so much improved. Now you hear that right there. We start to get into, when we go from the middle section to the bass section, this is a little bit too brash. We're going to have to balance that out with some voicing. I still think this section is a little bit weak. And these 3 notes I identified as notes that I'm going to need to work on. And when I tuned this upper treble section, it really brought out the clarity a lot more. Before I had tuned this, right after we put the action in, there were some issues up here, but they've really straightened themselves out a lot. Now, one thing that's that I find to be a pretty good tool for a piano technician to have is the chalk chuck. Because as you're going through the piano, you can mark things, and we've used this a little bit already, but I marked several notes here and thought about what I'm going to do to them as we move forward. Let's slide the action back out. And these 3 notes are not striking the left-hand string quite fully. It was very close, but I'm going to move them over a tiny little bit. Just to bring out some clarity in that left-hand string. And this E flat up here was having a few repetition problems on firm blows, and my take on that is that there's a bit of a jack issue here. So what I'm going to do is take my regulation screwdriver and allow that jack to go back under the knuckle a little more easily. You saw me do all this in the shop, but right now I'm going to back the repetition lever screw off a little bit so that the front of this lever rises. I'm going to feel that jack. That feels good. So I think that's going to do the trick right there. No, it didn't. Look at that. We're having repetition problems with that again. So a couple other things that might be an issue here. That spring is a tiny bit weaker than its neighboring spring, so we'll strengthen that up a tad bit. Better. I think that might do it. I'm not completely happy with it yet, though. That's better. So for some reason or other, it could be the placement of this knuckle being slightly different by 1 millimeter or so than the knuckles around it. Or perhaps that spring is just not quite as lively, but that was the one that stood out. It's not repeating as well as I wanted it to. And now with that adjustment I've made, the hammer is a tiny little bit too high, so I'm going to go ahead and lower that back into the hammer line here. It's all just step-by-step problem solving. So I've corrected those 4 notes. Now this C down here was another one that was causing problems, I think. Seems okay now. Pull the action out again and do a little voicing in this bass section. It's really not too bad, but let's touch it up a little bit anyway. So I'm going to grab my voicing tool. I have several different voicing tools, but this is the one that I normally use on grand pianos. This is a single needle voicing tool. It has 1 point in it. You can put 3 needles in there. You can see there are 3 screw holes on here, but I use 1 when I'm voicing grand pianos for the most part. And what I do with the voicing needle is I look at the face of the hammer and just insert that in the felt, generally where the string grooves are. It depends on why you're voicing it. But these just are a little bit too loud, so I'm just going to soften them down a little bit on the side. Just go with the first 4 and see what we've got. Much better. Getting pretty even here. This F is still a tiny bit problematic, and that's that's because of the damper issue that we identified earlier. Doesn't show up too much in playing, but and this key has a tiny little bit less aftertouch than its neighbors, so I think what I'm going to do is take the key rail back off. I'm going to increase the aftertouch, and that also, now you remember in my shop I added about 31 thousandths of an inch to some of these. So the front of this lever, this key, is going down a little bit farther than it was before. And that means the back of it's coming up farther, so it's going to interact with the damper lever and lift that damper up a tiny little bit more than it was before. It also means that the drop is a little bit higher, so we're going to need to get our little bitty screwdriver out here and lower the drop a tad bit on that one note. Not much though, just a little hair, like 31 thousandths of an inch or so. Oh, that's better already. Clearing all three of those strings in a way that it wasn't clearing them before. So just that small amount. Now we can tune that unison a little bit more cleanly as well. So the next question is, do I need to do anything else to this section where it shifts from the treble wires to the bass wires? I need to get these unisons in tune first. That sounds pretty even to me. Need to come down a little bit more. Now this is the point where I want things to get even, but it's up to the pianist who's going to be playing this piano how they want this to sound ultimately. There's a fair amount of variability in the way a high-end piano can sound tone-wise depending on how you voice it. This is definitely a high-end piano. And I like it a lot, just the way it is. You can play it soft. Control there. Very nice. Let's see, what else do we need to get done here? That's most of it. Now, this pedal squeak, sadly enough, has You know, it was probably related to the way the action was positioned in the piano before. It's just completely not there. And none of the bearing points, I can't feel anything that needs to be lubricated. It was so obvious in the past, and it's just so not there now. So, was it? Oh, okay. Now was it the sostenuto pedal that was squeaking? Okay, it wasn't the soft pedal. Okay, good. Oh, great. Now we have something we can fix. No wonder you couldn't get to it. It's inside the piano. I'm going to go ahead and pull the action back out on the rack here one more time to remove the action stack. That seems to have been the one. Now here's some other parts that are breaking. This is a Teflon bushing here. And you know, 40-year-old Teflon in some of these issues, some of these places on the piano doesn't hold up super well. There are Teflon bushings down in the pedal lyre itself too that at some point should be replaced. But that's a different deal. Ooh, much better. Let's take a look at these back checks again, because I've moved some of the hammers around a little bit, and though I did take care of this in my shop, we've moved things since then. Let's take another look at what we got going on here. These back check pliers, they bend wires, so it's curved on the bottom and curved on the top, so if you squeeze it, it'll bend the wire. They're getting a little bit worn out though, I might add. These hammer tails are so much nicer than the original hammer tails that came off of this piano. And they interface with the back check so much better. The back checking on this piano is really good, which gives greater stability in the feel for the player as well. Okay, let's see, anything else in here we need to do? Not at this moment, I think. This is called the back action. This is the damper lever tray. And if you push down on the sustain pedal, the whole tray raises up and lifts all the damper levers, so you get your sustain. But the back of each key interfaces with one lever. So you push down on the front of the key, the back of it pushes up to lift that damper lever. And these are original 1980 parts, and they sometimes can cause problems. I mean, if part of a complete action rebuild, you'd replace all of this too. It's called the back action. And I've had situations where these click or make funny sounds, or you can see these little lead weights in here. I've had situations where the lead weight will fall out and jam things up. Not too often though. This is the damper lever stop rail. Shows how high up the damper levers can go. And that has an impact on when if you have a hard blow on the piano, a hard staccato blow, the damper lever goes up, the damper rises all the way up, and that stops how high it can go. it feels pretty funny if this is misadjusted. You'll feel an afterblow as the damper comes back down again. We're not going to mess around with that because the dampers on here are working surprisingly well. They're in good shape. These tabs are the sostenuto tabs, and they interact with the sostenuto rail, which is what had the big squeak on it that we were adjusting over on the piano action. So we're going to go ahead and check that. I think it's probably working pretty well, but it can be something that might need to be adjusted too. So we're going to slide the action back in and check the sostenuto rail, and we'll have to redo the back checking a tiny little bit too now that we've moved all those back checks around. Boy, that sounds good. No more squeak on the sostenuto. See if it's doing what it's supposed to do. Well, it did on that note. Well, that's problematic. It's not returning, it's not releasing as quickly as it should. So let's pull this back out again. Steinway sostenutos can be a real bear at times. So that spring might not be quite strong enough here. We're going to have to make sure everything is as loose as it can be. Because I don't want to have to replace, I don't have another sostenuto spring I can put on there. Could order one from Steinway, I suppose. Yeah, got it. So that's doing what it's supposed to do now. Let's work with the dampers a little bit more. We're going to be sewing things up here pretty soon at this point. I'm going to raise the back checking a little bit here, because in moving these it went down a tad bit. I think Steinway says something like 5/8 of an inch from the strings, but the reality is you got to get them about as close as you can. And every piano has different wear on it, so you're always working with the parts you have. See, that one's a little too high. I can actually feel that back check on this hammer tail. If I push down on this while I'm pushing up, which kind of simulates a hard blow, you can actually feel that. So we've gotten that one a little too high there. I have to move that back a little. That's kind of your test area. Same thing over and over again. but I'm making decisions here. And these notes, these 5 notes, starting with this A and ending with this C sharp, these 5 notes, maybe I'll add this D even, they just sound a little tiny bit weaker than the surrounding notes. And I know it's not related to the hammers striking the strings, because we've already corrected for all of that. So I think I need to add a tiny little bit of an acetone hardening agent, acetone with plastic in it, and I'm just gonna add a tiny little drop. And this is something that we won't know the full effects of for a little while. So we're gonna go ahead and add this, and then we'll put the piano back together again, and see what it sounds like. So just a little bit more voicing here. A lot of times, I have to spend a lot more time voicing pianos if I put new hammers on them than this piano. This piano, it just sounds so good, and the hammers are so nice. So I don't like to use this stuff very much. If I had to use a lot of this, I would use it just before I was ready to walk out of the room, because you don't really want to inhale a lot of acetone. We're only going to put in about 6 drops total here, so that's not going to be so bad. Okay, I just put 1 drop on each of those 6 hammers, and it will make a noticeable difference. It's going to take a little while for it to set in, but I think we've addressed everything that we need to address at this point. Now, before someone performs on this piano, it's going to have the tuning touched up again, because it really was so out of tune that it won't be very stable. But let's just finish putting it together here. Okay, so these notes, I don't know if you can hear the difference or not, but I sure can. These are the notes that I added 1 drop of acetone to each one of those notes. It brought them right into line with everything else. Now, after this gets played by the person who works in this studio for a few weeks, if they have things that pop out that they want to have voiced differently, I'll come back up and work on this a little bit more. It sounds pretty smooth and pretty even to me right now, but after it gets played heavily for a couple dozen hours, things may change a little bit. As I say every week on my radio program, All Things Piano, have a great rest of the week. Remember to treat everyone with kindness and respect as you move through your week.